Welcome to section number 2 of Board Basics. I'm Dave Dawson, Senior Project Specialist with Community Development Professionals.
And I'm Sherry Lawson, Director of Special Projects for Community Development Professionals.
In section number 1, we talked about the 8 roles and responsibility of the board for your nonprofit. Now, in section number 2, we will be looking at board structure. There are 3 main components to the board structure that we will look at. 1 is preparing for the board. 2 is bringing in the board. And number 3 are board committees.
When we're talking about preparing for the board, one of the first steps that you want to do is develop board materials. I will put in a plug here to let you know that if you attend the all-day physical class of Back to Basics that we offer, again, you can check out our full training schedule at www.communitydevelopmentprofessionals.com, and there's a tab on there that says training. If you attend the all-day Back to Basics training, you get a wonderful toolkit that gives you just a tremendous amount of resources for your organization. And one of those resources is a book called Your Field Guide to Operating Your Nonprofit Board of Directors. In that book, it does have samples of all the materials we're going to talk about now. Just in case you're looking for that, that is available. Developing board materials. Some of the board materials you want to have in place before you start recruiting board members is an application. The application gives you an opportunity to compare your applicants apples for apples, so to speak. You can look at the same information on each person, and you're getting that in writing that you can keep in a file. You should start a board member file just as you start employee files. The second thing you want to have in place is board job descriptions. If you're approaching somebody to be a board member, it's important to have a job description to give them so that they understand that role and responsibility. One of my favorite things is a board contract, where you list out what it means to be a board member. So you're going to put things in there like, I will regularly attend board meetings. I will observe the policies of the organization's bylaws and policy and procedure manual. I will come to fundraising events. I commit to giving money. That's not something we've talked about yet in this training, but it's really important that all board members are giving something financially to the organization. So those are the things that you want to put in your board contract so that everybody's starting off in the same place of understanding that this is what we're doing as a role in a board member. I do want to say it was interesting. I had one organization come through our training, and she called me afterward and said, our board members are not willing to sign contracts. What do you think I should do? And I said, well, what if you see if they'll be willing to grandfather it in, that they don't have to sign contracts, but everybody from now on will. And then by the time the term limits are up, we have a board that are fully committed and willing to sign those contracts. So I love the board contract piece, as it really does put that commitment out there.
But that brings up a very vital piece that we do need to talk about, and that is term limits. We strongly believe in term limits for your board. Not that there aren't many people who are still very valuable and should still be part of your organization, maybe in a subcommittee capacity or something like that, but you need to bring in new board members on a regular basis to keep fresh ideas and fresh blood flowing through your organization.
It's great. And that's one of the reasons we're talking about what you have to have in place to prepare for new board members. You want to be doing that on a regular basis. The next thing that we would recommend is establishing a board attendance policy. I will tell you, before I worked at CDP, I worked at a nonprofit, and there was a board member who I had volunteered for 5 years, been on staff for several years, and been an executive director for 2 years, and still never met this board member. So one day I finally got the courage to say to the rest of the board, who is this person and why do we still list her name on our board? And everybody's like, well, she signed up, she never came to any meetings. And so we started talking about the idea of an attendance policy. And what we did was we said, if you have more than 3 unexcused absences in a year, you can be removed from the board. And we went through with that and voted that in, and that became a policy, which I highly recommend. There are a lot of times people agree to be on your board and then don't show up at the meetings. It is vital that your board members are showing up and actively involved in what you're doing. And so that's why we really recommend the attendance policy. I will tell you the end of the story is because she didn't come to 3 more meetings, she was removed as a board member and called just crying. She was really stunned because she said she needed to be a board member for her job. And so she was somebody who had gotten on the board because she had to have that listed in her own credentials in her job, but never bothered to show up at the board meeting. And so it was really important that have that attendance policy in place.
Well, I asked the question one time when we were teaching this class. I asked, why would anybody be interested in being on a nonprofit board when you really look at all the responsibilities that you have? Now I understand the answer is typically they want to help. But I had one lady in the back of the room raise her hand, and I asked, okay, why? And she said, for their obituary. And I thought, how ironic. There are so many people out there that are joining organizations simply to have their name on the roster. If you have board members that is what you're getting from them, they're not helping you move forward. They're not the most effective board members that you could have.
The last thing you want to do is establish a board policy on conflict of interest. If you've become a 501c3 in the past couple of years, you've done this. It's now a required part of your application process. If your organization was around before you had to do that, it is vitally important that your policies and procedures have a statement on a conflict of interest policy. Basically, what we're looking at here is the idea that we're not going to be paying our board members, we're not going to be hiring our board members to do jobs and money exchanging hands, and that we're going to be free of conflict of interest. This is incredibly important if you plan on working with federal funds at all. The word from the federal government, again, these days is that you avoid even the appearance of a conflict of interest. You can get yourself in a lot of trouble that way. At this time, there's an activity slide. Take a moment and write down or take the time to think about what board materials you currently have in place.
As we continue to talk about preparing for the board, one area we need to look at are what are the expectations of the new board members? Time, money, expertise. These are all areas that we need to be looking at when we are recruiting our next board member. Now, every once in a while, we do find the goose that laid the golden egg and someone who has all three of these available. That's typically not the case. But what we need to do is look at these areas, and we need to be clear to the new board members of what our expectations for them are in each one of these areas.
If I went back, I would say one of the things I like in the sample board contract that's available in the field guide to developing and operating your nonprofit board of directors, and one of the things they have in there is I will commit to so many X number of hours a month in service. And it's so important for you to understand that's not the hour and a half it takes to have a board meeting once a month. We're also expecting you to be in subcommittees. We're expecting you to do work on the subcommittees. So the contract itself said 5 to 10 hours a month of service, which I think is really a good number. So it's important to outline the time there. However, you also we have talked about the importance of all board members giving financially to the organization. In the first section, we talked about that. We'll say again that every board member should be contributing something financially to your organization. There are a couple reasons for that. The first reason is if you're going to seek out grant funding, a question that is common on grant applications is, do you have 100% board giving? This means 100% of your board members give something financially to the organization. You may be thinking, as it often comes up, does volunteer hours count? No, they don't. We're talking about actually giving a financial contribution to the organization. That's what grant funders are talking about in that place. I will tell you that when I would go out and do donor development one-on-one, every single time I was asked the question, when I'm asking somebody to give a large contribution, I was always asked the question, do you have 100% board giving? It's important for you to be able to answer yes to that question. And so along those lines, it's important to let board members know up front before they agree to be board members that we are going to expect a financial contribution from you.
Now, I think we need to make sure we're clear about the fact that different people can give at different levels, and everybody needs to understand that. So the expectation is different or is set differently for different individuals. All we're saying here is no one's heard us say a dollar amount or a percentage. We don't say that. All we're saying is you need to be able to honestly answer the question, I have 100% board giving. If a dollar is what a board member has available to give to the organization, then that's what they need to give. But everyone needs to give.
The other area we talked about there was expertise. It's really important that if you're recruiting an attorney, let's say, to be a board member, you want to let them know up front, we expect you to use your legal skills for us. Because that may be a conflict of interest for their job. And so it's important for them to be able to clear that, not to get brought onto the board and then be like, oh, shock, we're expecting you to do this that maybe you're not allowed to do with your job. So whether that area of expertise is grant writing or attorneys or accountants, whatever it is that they're bringing to your organization, make sure you let them know up front. We're recruiting you because we really want you to do some legal work as part of our board. The next thing we're going to talk about is a board kit. We talked earlier about the materials that you want to have in place when you are preparing to recruit board members, but now we want to talk about what you want to have as a board kit. A board kit are the materials you have in place that you give to potential board members. So in that kit would be the application form, the job description, the board contract, and some basic information about your organization.
Secondly, we'll want to take a look at a board manual. Now, what would the board manual consist of? Well, bylaws, the strategic plan, any legal information of the organization, board policies and procedures, personnel policies, and most recent annual audit. Now remember, we're talking about a starting application process to begin. The second portion, after a person has been accepted onto the board, we know this is someone, we voted this person onto the board, that's when we look at giving them the board manual. At this time, we have an activity. If you could please identify what was expected of you at the point when you agreed to serve on the board in the areas of time, money, and expertise.
The next thing that we're going to talk about is developing an annual calendar. There are a lot of suggestions that you're getting through this training, and we often have all gone through webinars and trainings where we get good information, and I don't know about you, but what I do with that is then print out the slides and put them in a file in my office, and half the time don't look at them again. So hopefully that's not going to be the case here. We get ideas that what we know is that we should be doing a board evaluation, but we just really never get around to doing that. One of the keys in taking it from information you know you should do to something that you are actively doing is putting it down on a calendar and deciding ahead of time, when are we going to do that? Because if not, it so often falls by the wayside. Some things that you want to consider putting on your annual calendar is when you're conducting regular board meetings. Your bylaws should tell you how often you're going to meet. Typical language is quarterly, even if you're meeting monthly. You want to have that set when we're going to meet. You do not want to set your board meetings at the board meeting. So we've all gathered here today and everybody pulls out their calendar and says, okay, when are we all available again? Because there may be people who are there who are going to be left out of that process. So it's important to establish a time. It's maybe we're going to say we're going to meet the second Tuesday of every month at 6 o'clock. And so we know that that's our routine scheduled board meeting, and we put that on the calendar. There may come up meetings where you have to change the time, but that should be the exception, not the rule. The next thing is conducting a board self-evaluation. You should be evaluating yourself annually. Again, I'm going to put in the plug for the toolkit that we have available, and the field guide gives you an annual evaluation that you can use there. But you need to decide when you're going to do that. Are you going to do that in the summer? Things are a little bit slower. You have a little bit more time. In the January, we want to start off the new year with a fresh evaluation. It doesn't matter when you do it. You just need to decide at which monthly board meeting are you going to do your evaluation, or quarterly board meeting. You're going to do your evaluation and put that on a calendar. The next is reviewing the performance of your executive director. Again, we would say that one of the roles of the board is overseeing the executive director, and you don't ever want to be in the place for your executive director to be in the place where they have to come to you and ask you, will you do an evaluation? You should determine when you're going to do that. Again, I would say, are you going to do it on their anniversary date? Are you going to do it at the beginning of the year? You need to determine that, put it on a calendar, and that's the month that you're doing that all the time. We would highly suggest that you do 2 board retreats a year, at least one. 1 is the minimum. You need to be doing 1 board retreat a year. 2 is better. The organization I worked for, we did that every October. It was just on the calendar. We knew our board meeting in October. We met the 3rd Saturday of every month. And the 3rd Saturday of October was going to be an all-day board retreat. That was always on the calendar. Everybody planned for it. We were all in attendance.
Now, I'd like to add at this point, lots of people ask me during the training classes, do we really have to go out into the woods, into a cabin to do this? No. A board retreat can be done anywhere that you'd like. It can be done at your office, however it looks. It doesn't have to be a weekend getaway for everybody, but it does need to have time set aside to do this.
And in an atmosphere where you don't have distractions. You don't want to be in the office during the day when other people are around coming and knocking on the door all day long. So you may need to get away just that much. I would also say we've had a lot of luck in doing that. We often went to a Christian campground who let us have a room. There were hotel rooms that had suites that were available for strategic planning sessions. There are a lot of people who are willing to give you space for free for that. The next thing we have on the calendar is recruiting new board members. Often, bylaws are written in a way that says that we're going to elect a certain percentage of board members every year. So they're kind of straggled. If we have terms of 3 years, not everybody starts the same and ends the same. So we have new board members and old board members serving equally together. If your bylaws read that way, and you have to be looking ahead and saying, okay, let's say some organizations will make all their term limits end in December. So no matter when you started on the board, your 3-year term ends in December of that year. Well, so what we know is we're going to be losing some board members in December as their terms expire, or maybe they've hit their term limits. And so we need to be planning for that. The time to start recruiting new board members is not in December. Because if we're looking at that application process and the way we want to go through that, it's going to take some time. And so you want to kind of back up and say, wow, we really need to have at our September meeting a list of possibilities put on the table so that we're ready for December. That needs to be on the calendar so that you know at the September meeting, we are bringing a list of people that we're looking for. The other thing is developing and renewing your strategic plan. That's one of the great things to do at board retreats. So if you're doing 1 or 2 a year, you can say the first one, we're going to do some additional planning, but we're going to review our plan and move forward with that.